Let's learn about the Rosaceae. I have a botanist friend. His name is Jeff Rose, and I know his dad too, Greg. He's the dean at the school I used to teach at up in Marion. The other day when I sent an email to Greg asking about the family, as you do, I said, "Greg, how's the Rosaceae?" I think he knew what I meant. And the Rosaceae, other than the family I just referred to, is a bunch of flowers that have some features in common to some extent with the buttercups, and others not so much. Let's take a look at some of the variability in this large and diverse family. Sometimes divided into subfamilies, and I did a quick little pop into Google and discovered that some of these subfamilies have been rearranged. So rather than think of them strictly as being formal taxonomic distinctions, let's think of them as being types of members of the rose family that'll help you recognize them. So first off, I'd like to tell you that some members of the rose family, sometimes considered to be in the rose subfamily, they have pyrogenous flowers and aggregate fruits, like a blackberry or a raspberry or that weird strawberry thing. But sometimes the individual members of the Apocarpus gynoecium can fall off as separate achenes, and those are the members of the rose family that you might mistake for buttercups. Another subfamily or a group within the rose family is the one who has the fruit that's a drupe. These are basically cherries, plums, peaches, nectarines, and they have pyrogenous flowers. Their pyrogenous flowers are very distinctively pyrogenous. It's beautiful. It looks like a ping pong ball in a teacup. Another member of another bunch of members of the rose family is the ones that are like apples. That is to say, they have strictly epigynous flowers, ovary way down below, and the fruit is that odd accessory fruit called a pome, where the receptacle and or the hypanthium is the fleshy part, and the ovary is the part that's the core. And a slightly less well-known group of roses, but nifty nonetheless, is the Spirea subfamily. And this family has pyrogenous flowers, kind of looking a lot like, either of the two on the left there, the rose subfamily or the cherry subfamily. But the fruits, instead of being either a drupe or an aggregate of many fruits, is just 5 follicles, individual carpels that split along one suture to release seeds. And as if you've heard of Spirea is in that. Also a nice native shrub called ninebark. So let's take a look at some members of the rose family. Here's a typical member of the rose family. I should hope so, because it's in the genus Rosa. And what we see here in this picture is, in addition to the petals, is a lot of stamens, numerous stamens, spirally arranged. And then in the center, we have the stigmas of a lot of carpels, which are many in number, which are numerous. A feature that distinguishes the rose family from the sometimes similar buttercup family, there are two. The vegetative feature is that many members of the rose family, especially the ones whose flowers might suggest that they're kind of buttercuppy, is stipules. Stipules are little leaf-like appendages at the base of the leaf stalk. They're most prominent on roses. They're very prominent in this picture. And many members of the rose family, in addition to having compound leaves, have stipules. So that's a vegetative feature that distinguishes the rose family from the sometimes similar buttercups. Another feature which I'll mention is that the rose family has flowers that are pyrogenous. Sometimes the hypanthium is kind of small, but there's a bit of a hypanthium or a lot of a hypanthium, whereas the buttercups, no hypanthium, strictly hypogynous. Here's a lovely plant called smooth rose, Rosa blonda. And these are the fruits of rose. Rose fruits are kind of weird. And what rose so-called hips are there's like globe-shaped hypanthium, and then lining the inside of the hypanthium are achenes with kind of long styles that poke out the top of the orifice of that hypanthium, and they mature into achenes, not very juicy or anything, but a part of this conglomerate that becomes fleshy and acts as an enticement for animals to eat them and disperse the fruits is the hypanthium. It's called a hip. It's a kind of an odd fruit type that we didn't mention in fruits because it's kind of special. Here's a very typical member of the rose family, one you might mistake for a buttercup, were it not for the stipules. And if you were to look really carefully at the flowers, you'd see a little suggestion of a hypanthium. This is a cinquefoil. It's a it's it's not Potentilla fruticosa. That's totally wrong. This is it's Potentilla norvegica. Sorry, shrubby cinquefoil. I called a weed you. There, my mistake has been concealed. And this is a European weed, kind of really typical member of the rose family. Cinquefoil means 5 something fingers, I guess. Here's a lovely native cinquefoil. It's called sneezeweed. I don't think it's in the genus Potentilla anymore, but this is a plant that grows along beaches, along the Atlantic coast, and it extends inland along the Great Lakes. It's very rare in Ohio. It's only found in a few places. It's special undisturbed, and there aren't many undisturbed Lake Erie sandy beaches. This was taken at a beautiful state nature preserve in Lake County called Mentor Headland Dunes State Nature Preserve. And there's a number of these plants that kind of think they're along the ocean growing there. This is a member of the genus Avens. And one of the things about several closely related genera in the Rosaceae is that in flower they're kind of similar. You know, that basic pattern that we've said a bunch of times so far. Spirally arranged stamens and many, many carpels on a dome-shaped receptacle. And in flower, the genus Avens, or the genus Geum, common name Avens, and the genus Potentilla, common name five-finger, look a lot alike. But in the Potentilla, I'm going to go back. In the Potentilla, the ovaries may mature into kind of boring old achenes that just fall off of the plant onto the ground. Whereas in the genus Geum, the achenes develop a long extension of the former style and have a little hook bristle at the end, and they become sticktights that attach to animals passing by. So in flower they're kind of similar, but in fruit they kind of stand out and differentiate themselves. Also in this group of roses is the blackberry/raspberry. And these are all in the same genus, Rubus. And it includes blackberries and raspberries. There's a lot of species, and there's a lot of confusing genetic stuff that goes on. They tend to reproduce asexually after a few bouts of sexual reproduction. And so they have differentiated into a great many very difficult to distinguish species. And most people just don't try too hard to identify them to species, and some people are specialists in them. But how they work, blackberries and raspberries both are perennial plants in that they live, year after year after year after year. But the stems are biennial, so they only live 2 years. So a typical biennial, the first year it's vegetative, and the second year it produces flowers and fruits and then dies. That's true for the stems of this perennial plant that produces a lot of stems. The first year of blackberries or raspberries is called a primocane. And so this picture is a primocane. It's a nice stem with a lot of leaves, gathering a lot of photosynthate. Boom. And then the second year, it develops flowers. Then it's called a floricane. And that's where the flowers and the fruits are. And you can see this beautiful rosaceous Apocarpus gynoecium, lots of flower parts. It's almost fit into the FENSH. I guess it's just fence without the, because it's not hypogynous. Fensp. Anyway, here's a picture of a blackberry flower. And here's a picture of a cross section of the blackberry flower. And it shows, if you look really carefully, that hypogynous thing. So this little rim right here, and if you can see, the stamens are coming off of it and the petals are coming off of it. So right here where I'm sort of thickening it, this area right here is the hypanthium. So these stamens aren't coming off like right at this spot, but they're coming off where they're coming off. So it's a little bit suggestive of a hypanthium. Not much of one, but enough to make this be a perigynous flower. You got to have sharp eyes to see that, or look in a book. And here's the blackberry after it's been pollinated or not. These tend to reproduce what's called apomictically. They produce fruits, but without being pollinated. It's kind of an odd genetic thing. It's a kind of cloning, but with flowers. And blackberries and raspberries. Blackberries are aggregates of drupelets. And when a blackberry is removed from the inflorescence, the receptacle comes along with it. That's why blackberries don't have that. They're a little bit crunchier. The inside of that aggregate of drupelets is puffy. It's got some stuffing in there. That's the receptacle. Contrary-wise, raspberries, the receptacle stays attached to the plant, and when you pull off a raspberry or eat a raspberry or buy a raspberry, it's like thimble-shaped because the receptacle is on the plant still. They're a little bit more esculent and flavorful for that reason. That's the difference between blackberries and raspberries. So the members of the rose family that produce drupes, they tend to have a really nicely demarcated hypanthium. And there's the ovary right in the middle. And the stamens are inserted on the rim of the hypanthium, and the fruit is a drupe. The principal members of this genus are, of this group of rose family members is in the genus Prunus. Black cherry is Prunus serratina. And here is black cherry in flower. The inflorescence is what's called a raceme. It's an elongate inflorescence with flowers that are individually stalked. And the one on the right, I'm beginning to question whether the one on the right is black cherry and not choke cherry, a shrub with broader leaves. Nonetheless, the fruit is a drupe. Okay, let's move on to that other slightly less well-known group of rose family members, the Spirea group. And these are the ones who have pyrogenous flowers, but the carpel, the pistil, consists of 5 carpels, each of which splits open along one suture and therefore matures into a follicle. And in addition to Spirea, which is both an ornamental and a native plant, we have some wetland shrubs called steeplebush and hardhack, Spirea alba and tomentosa, respectively. This 9-bark is a shrub that's frequent-ish along watercourses typically, and it's a lovely native shrub, 9-bark. Here's a close-up showing, well, you can see the 5 style branches, suggestive of a 5-parted gynoecium. Let's take a look at the pome-producing group. And while apples aren't native, there are several native trees and shrubs that do produce pomes. And hawthorns. Hawthorns are the same sort of confusing taxonomic situation that blackberries are. They have occasional bouts of sexual reproduction, but a long time spans during which they reproduce asexually, and the result has been a lot of little sort of land races that are difficult to distinguish from one another, and some people are specialist experts in identifying hawthorns. And what they do, in addition to, by the way, sometimes having some nice stout thorns, is they produce pomes. They have a strictly inferior ovary, and the fruit is that thing that's got the fleshy parts that surrounds the ovary, which is a core. So here's a picture showing the undersurface of hawthorn flowers. And again, see the way it's swollen here? That's the ovary. And that's the clue that this is an inferior ovary. Hawthorn. Here's a cross-section, once again. So here's the hypanthium, and it's fused to the ovary. And here's where the petals and sepals are, and here's where the stamens are. And here's the ovary. It's inferior. This is the epigynous flower. Great. A native plant that also has pomes is the genus Sorbus. And I'm not totally sure Sorbus is native to Ohio. It's called mountain ash. And I put a little hyphen between the mountain and the ash to let the world know that it's not really an ash. It sort of vaguely looks like one because it has pinnately compound leaves, but of course they're alternate and opposite, and it's in the rose family. It's a lovely shrub. This picture is taken on a mountain, Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania. So let's take a look at a few more rose family members just to get sort of the feel for it. This is wild strawberry. It's in that Rosaceae subfamily, the one that kind of looks buttercuppy, and you can see the radial symmetry and the many stamens. Here's a lovely native shrub called shrubby cinquefoil, Daisy for fruticosa, and it used to be called Potentilla fruticosa. Fruticose means shrubby, and it's kind of common-ish in cultivation. I just bought one a few weeks ago to put in my front yard, and you used to see them like around fast food places, McDonald's, and you know what fast food places are. Now, I haven't seen them too much lately, but it does pretty well in cultivation. As a native plant, shrubby cinquefoil is kind of a special rarity that's only found in some really high-quality natural areas, particularly fens, those calcareous mires that don't have a lot of water circulation and don't have a lot of nutrients and that have cold water and kind of northerly conditions. That's where you'll find shrubby cinquefoil. So it's a really cherished native plant in the few places where it grows, such as at Cedar Bog, that isn't a bog, that is a fen, in Champaign County. Here's a picture of cinquefoil. The name means 5 fingers. It kind of looks like a hand. It's palmately compound. And this is Potentilla canadensis. Let's go on to the boo hiss. For each of our families, we'd like to sort of acquaint ourselves, if need be, with some members that are troublesome ecologically. And this is real troublesome ecologically. This is multiflora rose. Multiflora rose is a shrub that's doing especially too well in woodlands, probably in part because of white-tailed deer that eat things that don't have a lot of thorns. And it's got small white flowers, typical Rosaceae flowers, and like other Rosaceae, and especially other members of the genus Rosa, it has pinnately compound leaves. And like members of the Rosa, the rose genus, the rose family, it has stipules. A way to recognize this particular rose and distinguish it from some of the, actually distinguish from all of the roses that aren't it, and many of which are lovely native plants, such as that smooth rose, and other ones such as swamp rose and pasture rose, has to do with the stipules. And these stipules are kind of feathery. The technical term is fimbriate. So instead of being a nice smooth margin to the stipules of multiflora rose look kind of feathery and frilly and kind of a lot of little projections. And that's a pretty easy way to recognize this one if you're doing some resource management. Oh, there's a close-up. The fimbriate stipules of multiflora rose. So, to summarize, rose family, kind of diverse family. I like the little Peterson's icon for this. It shows the radial symmetry and not a whole lot else, but it's still a nice icon. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at some plants that have differences in the numbers of flower parts from the finch ancestral flower type.